I actually have a poster on the wall of Ray Bradbury's advice for a writer. And one of them says is don't think when you write, just write. Is it so you're typing along and you've got a character, and all of a sudden the character starts telling you what the story is. And they come up with lines that, I know it came out of my imagination, but I don't feel like I made that up. The character just said that, and I just typed it for them.
As a tribute to the imagination of Sue Burke as a science fiction novelist, I'm doing this podcast with a background I created of the setting of her novel Semiosis as a strange alien planet. In this novel, Earthlings are colonizing an alien planet. They want to create a new benevolent civilization and to avoid the errors of the past of the civilization on Earth. As the Earthlings explore this alien world, they find an intelligent species of plant that resembles bamboo, and they find a deserted village from another vanished society of alien colonists with domes and rainbow hues. That explains the tribute in the background I'm using. I'm trying to enter Sue Burke's imaginary world. I think Sue Burke's science fiction novel, Semiosis, is brilliant, and I want to ask her about what I think makes it brilliant. Why can't more of us write like this? I would like to do that, but I can't. I do interviews and analysis. This alien planet in Sue Burke's novel has sentient, intelligent species, and the most intelligent species on this alien planet is a dominant thinking bamboo. This thinking plant is clever enough to dominate human beings through its biology. Before the Earth colonists arrived on the planet, there was another species of alien colonists from another alien planet, mysterious and cloven-footed. Those earlier alien colonists were able to communicate and cooperate with the intelligent plant, but at first it seems that these other alien colonists disappeared, leaving only strange and wonderful artifacts. The struggle for life on this alien world is a struggle to communicate and to understand others. The focus of Sue Burke's novel has nothing to do with the typical preoccupation with technology and science fiction. Instead, the focus is on communication and understanding the consciousness of totally different minds. And that's where I think the novel is brilliant. How do you understand a mind that thinks totally different from yours? This is a normal problem in our lives, how to understand others who are different from us. That problem has become easier, that problem has increased as it has become easier to travel to distant countries, as immigration has increased, and as digital communication has made it easier to talk to people in distant locations. The novel takes this problem of communication and understanding to the extreme. The exploration in Sue Burke's novel of the problems of communication and understanding a very different consciousness is brilliant. How can you understand a consciousness that is radically different from your own? That's a question I have been pursuing in other interviews in this series with scientists who are exploring the consciousness of apes, elephants, dolphins, and octopuses. The work of these scientists has been examined in the SETI project to prepare for contact with other intelligent beings in the universe, if they exist. Some science fiction writers try to conceive ways to speculate beyond the limitations of our human perspective. They try to find the cracks in the barrier of the limitation. So, how did Sue Burke create such an engaging version of the problem of understanding a consciousness that is radically different from our own? There may be some clues in her life. A brief plot of the life of Sue Burke herself is that she crosses borders, physical borders, mental borders. She's a talented writer and a talented professional translator. Being a translator requires that she understand how writers in other cultures think, sometimes centuries ago. That's crossing a mental border. Sue Burke not only immersed herself in the art of translation while translating Spanish works into English, she also immersed herself in a foreign culture, in a foreign land, crossing another border. For about 16 years, on the verge of the new millennium, she moved to Madrid in Spain. In Spain, she had to confront her assumptions and her sense of what's normal. It was also in Spain that she wrote most of the novel Semiosis over 3 years. 2 years after returning to the United States, her novel Semiosis was published. So, how can we fathom this exceptional and brilliant novel about life in an alien world? So, Sue,
Mhm.
would I be a crazed fan to think that the novel Semiosis is brilliant, or is that a reasonable opinion?
Um, that's not mine to say. I mean, it's like telling a woman she's beautiful. Maybe she is, maybe she's not. She has a secret opinion, but that's for other people to judge.
Hmm.
I do like it. I had a wonderful time writing it. Um, and I think it's a good novel, but other people can decide what they think.
What was wonderful about writing the novel?
Well, as I say, it was trying to imagine another place, another time, thinking about how other people and other entities would approach the problems in the novel, and also setting up problems for them to have to solve. And writing a novel is just a wonderful adventure. You get to play with your imagination and to do things.
Sue, when I read some exceptional writers, I feel that I'm experiencing a consciousness that is not mine, not what I would experience by myself without the book. My list, my personal list of exceptional writers has Franz Kafka, Kurt Vonnegut, science fiction writers like Stanislav Lem and Ray Bradbury. For me, the experience of reading these writers is a different and extreme mental experience. The writers I've listed, Kafka, Vonnegut, Bradbury, Lem, Carroll, and Seuss, are all distinct and different, but they all have the power to let us experience an extreme consciousness different from our own. So, my question is, does that make sense to you that we can experience an extreme different consciousness in reading a book like yours?
That is the hope of the writer, that it's going to show you something new, and help you understand someone else, another point of view. So I hope so. That's the goal.
How would you know if you've reached your goal?
Well, you other people have to tell you. I there was a I mean you write a novel and you try. There was a Broadway writer, and he wrote about musicals, and he said that you write a flop the same way that you write a hit. But he wouldn't know what it was going to be until it was staged and see if other people liked it. And that's just the process. There's a whole lot of I've got a whole book that just says the writer's book of doubt. And it's all the things that you worry about when you're doing writing because you don't know. By the way, I can't read that book because it just fills me with every kind of uncertainty and nervousness. Last name, it's on my shelf right over there. But it's all of the things you worry about when you're a writer because you don't know if you're doing a good job or not. You do your best.
Hmm. So when you talk about your doubt as an author, whether you're reaching what you want to reach, do you think you're better with that doubt or better without that doubt?
Yes and no. When you're, I think it's good to have it because it keeps you always trying to improve. And I study writing every single day. Things that I should be doing, things I could be doing better, because I know that I have some typical faults in what I do, and I try to solve them. I actually have a poster on the wall of Ray Bradbury's advice for a writer. And one of them says is don't think when you write, just write. And so you should not try to second guess yourself when you're actually writing. That's another process. But the first draft, you just do your best, write what comes to you. And when you get it right, and I've had this happen to me, is it so you're typing along and you've got a character, and all of a sudden the character starts telling you what the story is. And they come up with lines that, I know it came out of my imagination, but I don't feel like I made that up. The character just said that, and I just typed it for them. Um, that's usually called the flow. You get into a creative process where it's just working. And you're just sort of like a stenographer, and all of the rest of it is just taking care of itself. And if you've done a good job, and if you've imagined everything thoroughly, and if you have a character who you've imagined to the point where that there's enough of a personality that where if you think of someone that you know really well, you think, well, how is Sally going to respond to this? And you know Sally well enough that she's going to say this. So you invent a character well enough that when you get to this point, the character is going to say, "No, I don't want that. I want this," and will answer something in that way. So that's the flow. And on a good day, you might reach that. And if you're prepared. But otherwise, I mean, it's just writing. Writing is. I actually get offended when people think that there's some sort of magic here. No, it's just hard work. And there's, lots of advice out there on how to do the work, and it's all correct. But it's just work, and you do it. And if you're lucky, it turns out good.
From listening to what you said, you feel that the characters you're writing um, have some kind of independence, and you're not doing the writing. But you know, if you thought that 100%, you'd be psychotic. If if you really believe that, if you really thought that this literary character is not of your making, doesn't come from you, if you really believe that, you'd be psychotic, right?
But I do have imaginary friends.
Okay.
And I
What
know they're imaginary, but
what are
they're
your what are okay? So what are your imaginary friends?
well, they're the people I'm writing about. Um, and what are they like? And even the villains, if you have them, you need to flesh them out so that if this person was real and they'd be walking down the street, you could say, "Oh wow, there's Bob," um, because you've imagined that person sufficiently to do that. But you're right. If you need a little bit of distance, and you know that this is all make believe, but you can make believe in a really serious way.
Um, and what we're talking about is the mystery of writing, the mystery of art. What Coleridge called willing suspension of disbelief. That
Mhm.
that and which happens to audiences when they're watching a film, that they're reacting emotionally, but they know people aren't being beheaded. That sort of thing. And like I said, if you 100% bought into your characters are voices that are independent of you, that would be psychotic. And in the same way, if if I read a brilliance into your novels and it isn't there, isn't that kind of my psychosis?
Mm, every reader brings what they want to a piece. And so sometimes it's interesting when you get a group of readers together and they all talk about the same book. They might see different things in the book or interpret things different ways, and that's fine. You, like any act of communication, the you send something and someone else receives something, but it comes in both directions, and that's fine. I mean, if yeah, and also if reading like say a book like Moby Dick now that took place what over 100 years ago, 200 years ago, we would read it different from people who read it back in when it was originally published, and it flopped, by the way. Um, we look at it, we think it's a masterpiece now, and rightfully so, but at the time it was not a success. Um, so, we look at things differently, we understand things differently, we bring different experiences to it. When I was writing about Stephen, who is a plant, what do plants do? And I'd done a lot of research. You can see there's plants behind me. Try to understand why do they do what they do? How do they approach their problems of life in their way? Um, and if they could talk, what would they tell me? Um, um, and to this day, having written the book, when I walk down the street and I see a tree, and it's like, whoa, how's that tree doing? What do they think of this? And so they can remember easily 2 years back. Was there and they know what day it is because they can tell by the angle of the sun. They know what day of the calendar it is. And so they can remember, was there a ice storm on this day in the past? And if the answer is yes or no, that will influence what they're going to do. You can also see occasionally there's a tree that's a little bit more risk taking than the rest because there's some advantages to that. There's a tree in the park right behind me that stops work early in the fall because it's figured I've had enough. I've stored up enough. It's maple. I'm going to get through the winter, and I'm just not going to try working anymore because the weather here in the fall can be really weird. So that tree makes its own decisions. Other trees, generally they run with the pack. But that's the thing is that once you understand what the trees are doing, why they're doing it, because they have to make decisions, it can be a very exciting time in spring to just look at the trees and understand that they're very anxious right now and very eager. And it's an odd feeling to walk down the street and know that you're surrounded by trees that are having an emotional moment.
When I listen to that, it sounds to me like an indigenous perspective, because that's the way indigenous storytellers and indigenous myths um, experience, and very different from what we do in our kind of empirical scientific community. Um, we were we were talking about the difference in the experience between the writer writing the novel and the reader reading the novel, and you talked about um, you feel that readers are free to bring their own interpretations. Um, but how do you feel if readers bring an interpretation to your novel that you didn't intend, and you think doesn't reflect you properly? How would you react to that?
Well, I've had that happen, and that's fine. Um, and their readers are entitled to believe what they want. I've also had readers who um, looked at the work my work and seen things in it that I did not intend to do. But it's a perfectly valid way of looking at it. And it's actually, they thought I was smarter than I was. I didn't mean to say that. Once they explain, what they saw there, it's like, yeah, it is there. And it is a really good thing. And I didn't do that intentionally, but it works. And I'm fine with that. If someone finds more in the work than I intended to do, and that's possible because, I mean, all of us, we're surrounded by storytelling all the time, and we absorb how to tell a story. And some of that starts to be unconscious, starts to be automatic. The way, if you drive a car all the time, you just see a red light, you automatically know what to do. You don't have to think it through. So when you're telling a story, you think of things, or you don't think of things, but they're in there and you put them into the story without intending, but they're there, and that's fine. Um, but if people like or don't like the story, I mean, I read books or that I don't like, but I know other people who do like them. That's fine, and we have our reasons, and that's okay.
You've been talking about when you write, what you're consciously aware of what you're writing, and also what you're writing, but you're not conscious that you're writing it. That's when the characters seem to take on a life of their own, but you're not psychotic. That
Hmm.
that still comes from you.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And so some readers, if we follow that premise, um, may get an experience from your novel that you're unconscious of, but is still you. And other readers might have an experience which has nothing to do with you and is totally with them, and maybe even is to the point of being offensive because it doesn't represent you and your ethics accurately. Is that fair?
Yeah, people do that, and I had someone read my novel and said, "Well, plants could never think." Well, no, they can't think like that. That's why it's science fiction. But whatever.
Well, exactly. Why are you reading fiction if you don't believe in fiction?
Hmm.
Why are you reading fiction if you're unwilling to enter the imaginative experience of fiction?
That's how writing goes. Sometimes people just bring odd things to it, or they love the cover art, and that cover changed everything they thought about how they thought about the novel or the title or who knows. And you have no you launch this and then you just hope. So that when I was trying to create an alien, I realized that I had something that was really different, and that if I could, I would show people what plants are capable of, except for thinking. Everything in semiosis that plants do are things that plants can do here, and they do here. So we think we're in charge, but they know better.